Hello, and welcome to another Architects Panel discussion brought to you by the Vancouver Island Architects Chapter and the South Vancouver Island Chapter of the RAIC. My name is Andy Gyrie, and I'm a local architect with Cascadia Architects and an executive on the Vancouver Island Architects Chapter. I'm grateful to be able to introduce today's discussion. Before we get into the topic at hand for today, I would like to let you know that we have ongoing sessions, including talks on Victoria's seismic issues and heritage buildings. Now I would like to introduce the second of two panel discussions on homelessness and housing. The first session featured a panel of individuals from diverse agencies and backgrounds who brought their frontline experience dealing with the issues from a standpoint of policy and social agency, making clear the complexity and intersectionality of the issues affecting housing and homelessness. It became clear in the first session that most of the big problems are not architectural. And yet, as key players in the creation of new housing, the question remains, what can architects do to help solve the problem? This session examines the issues of design for those experiencing homelessness and lack of affordability with a more detailed and architectural design focus. The panel, composed of experienced and well-regarded architects from Victoria and Vancouver, will respond to a series of questions and share illustrated examples from both their experience as well as personally chosen relevant projects. Moderated by local architect Terry Williams, the discussion is certain to cover important topics and ideas that the audience will be sure to find stimulating and inspiring. The discussion will be followed by a Q&A. We would like to thank the panelists for volunteering to participate in this discussion. The 5 panelists are Roger Hughes, architect, AIBC, and founding partner of Hughes Condon Marler Architects. Christine Lintott, architect, AIBC, and principal of her own architectural practice based on Vancouver Island. Erica Sangster, architect, AIBC, and principal at D'Ambrosio Architecture and Urbanism. And David Simpson, architect, AIBC, founding partner of DYS Architecture. Now on with the session.
It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this panel discussion and to thank the 4 panelists, distinguished panelists, who will share their experiences in participating in this vision and sharing their visions and sharing their experiences on what I think is, I must say, is a very, very difficult issue. And the issue in this instance is of housing and homelessness, the design challenge. And this is, as you know, is part 2 of this discussion that we've had previously. I'd also like to thank Chris, Andy, and Stace, because there's an enormous amount of effort that goes in backstage to doing these things. And in this instance, I know in getting everybody together has been time consuming, and it's required a lot of effort and finesse. So thank you to those guys. My job, I'm told, is to moderate. So I will start. Each panelist will be given 5 minutes only to present their thoughts, views, ideas, and experiences. Firstly, on the topic of past successful examples or ideas of housing for homelessness and or affordability. Each panelist will be given 5 minutes to discuss that. I will introduce each of the 4 panelists in order before they actually present. Then there will be a short discussion between the panelists after that for about 10 minutes. And then we'll go on to the second topic, which will be discussing proposed projects, ideas, and innovation regarding housing for those experiencing homelessness and affordability. So each panelist will be given 5 minutes to discuss that and related topics. And then after each panelist has presented. Then there will be about 15 minutes after that of discussion between the panelists. Then we'll open it up to everybody attending. And at the end will be a 2-minute period per panelist to summarize. Now, I know that sounds complicated, but we've got a lot of ground to cover and what is a very sensitive subject. And it's intriguing to me that we as architects this has pricked our social conscience. And here we are grappling with this issue in this particular manner. So it's my pleasure to introduce Erica. Erica, I'm not sure if she chose the spot number 1 or whether she was given that spot number 1, but Erica grew up in Victoria and is a principal of D'Ambrosio Architecture and Urbanism. Erica has a passion for projects that supported the well-being of their users and at the same time enhances their place in Victoria. During her 20 years with DAU, she has worked on a range of residential and commercial projects in the Victoria area, including the Reliable Controls headquarters at View Royal and the Rotunda office complex at 1550 Douglas Street, and a number of housing projects. I'm told that she's very excited to share her experiences with us today. So Erica, I'm going to hand it over to you. You've got 5 minutes.
Today, I have a quick tour through a few local examples to take a very high-level look at some built projects that have contributed to housing diversity and either directly or indirectly sought to improve access to affordable housing. Starting at the larger scale, at least for our practice, the Selkirk Waterfront Master Plan was conceived as an integrated mix of commercial and residential uses and contains a range of housing types. The master plan organized the site so that uses relate to the surrounding context, creating a gradient from industrial through to residential. The main street through the district is the continuation of Jetland Road, which you see here, which is bracketed by commercial at the Gorge Road intersection, then is characterized by office and commercial to the east, and residential over ground floor commercial on the west. Residential uses range from townhouses to apartments, including subsidized housing, market condominiums, and long-term care. The first part of the master plan to be built was a light industrial building to the south here. And the second building was the subsidized housing built towards the main entrance of Selkirk called LeBlanc Place. It's a combination of rental apartments, townhouses, and ground floor commercial that was designed by architect Baz Smith. LeBlanc Place was the first residential project to be built at Selkirk so that it would already be in place when subsequent market residential projects would come into being. It demonstrates how subsidized housing can be integrated into a community through active ground floor uses and a thoughtful, human-scaled public interface. Moving on, we don't often have the opportunity to plan affordable housing within a larger master plan context, but incremental change can be achieved on a smaller scale by densifying infill sites with missing middle housing. This project replaced 4 single-family homes that had become surrounded on 3 sides by multifamily residential and institutional uses. We shaped the project into 2 apartment buildings and a row of townhouses to create a comfortable rhythm along the street frontages and to step the scale down to face the stable single-family neighborhood to the south. We took lessons from Selkirk Waterfront to calibrate the spaces between buildings to comfortably fit private patios and semi-private pedestrian pathways. I unfortunately didn't have a chance to go by and photograph for this presentation, but the landscape designed by Ladder has since flourished and grown in, which ties the buildings really well with the leafy neighborhood along Richmond Road. Perry Place is another infill project, which is a 4-story affordable assisted living building on what was formerly a single family home lot, immediately adjacent to the 5 Corners in James Bay. It's an unusually small building for assisted living with only 21 residents, which was only feasible, we were told, because the initial planning included providing meal service from the long-term care center across the street, Beckley Farm Lodge, which reduced the need for a commercial kitchen and made the economics work for a smaller building. This arrangement didn't ultimately work out, and a few years later we had to design a retrofit to fit a small commercial kitchen within the building. The property is quite narrow for multifamily, which resulted in units that are quite shallow, and positively, they have very generous access to daylight and views. I spoke with a colleague whose parent lives here, and she spoke very positively about the size of the building, and that she said 21 residents is small enough that it feels more like a large family and less institutional. Lessons learned are that the on-site meal preparation was a really big improvement for livability in the building. And the other takeaway was that this front entry court that you can see is way more popular than the second floor roof patio that's just above, I think because it's so connected to the entrance, and that it would be much more enjoyable if the space were entirely pedestrian, whereas right now it's shared with pickup and drop off. At a smaller scale yet again, this is the Hey Neighbor project, which is a temporary solution to provide emergency shelter in Victoria. In collaboration with the city, the team designed a complex of container buildings that could be constructed and installed within just a matter of months, including permitting time. The project's laid out with a secure entry point off the corner of Caledonia and Vancouver, with shared service spaces located to the south end of the site. The buildings are all single story to minimize complexity. And the idea is that these will be temporary. I believe they're intended to be used for about 18 months. And then after that, they can be redeployed to other locations as needed.
That's 5 minutes. If you have one last word.
Here we are. I just want to say that as a temporary solution, the project's conceived to be simple and efficient and provide the basic needs of shelter. And of course, more long-term solutions must meet a higher level expectation so that affordable housing is meaningfully integrated into our neighborhoods and has qualities of human scale and dignity that anyone would want for their home. And I'll pass it back to Terry.
Thanks. Good word to finish on is dignity. Thank you. So it's my pleasure now to introduce David Simpson. David is a founding partner of DYS Architecture, a professional consulting firm established in 1982 for the practice of architecture, urban and regional planning, and research in associated areas. David's recent and current work is focused on affordable housing projects in some of BC's smaller communities on Vancouver Island and in northern BC. These projects are incorporating new sustainability concepts, including Passive House building standards and Step 4 of the new BC Energy Building Code. Welcome, David, and thank you for sharing your experiences.
Oh, thank you. It's good. It's nice to be back for a second time at this. It's good to be able to carry on and continue. So I must be quick. I must start off here with my own time. I thought I'd start with this. This is the Four Sisters Housing Co-op. And I wanted to bring this up because this project was finished in 1987. It's 34 years old. And I thought it would be interesting to put a timeline to what we're doing, because here I am doing more affordable housing than ever 34 years later. So it's quite incredible that it's good we're talking about this right now, but this has been going on for a long time. This project is outstanding to me. It was the first major affordable housing project that we did. It's in the downtown east side, and it was a vision of DERA, Downtown East Side Residents Association, with Jim Green. And I think what's remarkable about it is its connection to community and what it did for community. It's not just a standalone project. It actually was a catalyst for a lot of things that happened in the downtown east side. And among other things, it was one of the first projects to have family housing above 4 stories in the city of Vancouver. It was one of the first high-density family residential projects, certainly in the downtown east side. It incorporated a lane. It did a whole bunch of things that were somewhat unique. I guess we were a little naive then, and things were very easy to do. But it's a testament to what affordable housing can do. It's been around for a long time. It's still very successful. And I think for me, it's sort of the granddaddy of everything that I've been doing. So Andy, if you can move forward. So we fast forward 34 years, and this is Nutsumut-Lalem. This is in Nanaimo. This is another remarkably community integrated project. It's Indigenous project, obviously. They like to say it's by Indigenous, for Indigenous, but Nanaimo Aboriginal Center, who created this, are actually open to all parts of the community. The really interesting thing about this is that this is secondary to them. Their NAC's thrust is in education. They believe that getting to the kids, giving the kids a good education is one method of getting us out of this situation that we're in. So they have the 80-20 rule. 20% of a child's life is spent in school, 80% of their life is spent in a home environment. And if that home is in chaos or turmoil or whatever, you can understand that the education doesn't go far. So this school is actually in support of education. They have 2 child cares, they have 2 schools. In fact, their K-12 school is across the street from Nutsumut-Lalem. And so they built this to bring families here and have kids here and make that connection to the schools. So it's networking, it's working out in the community, it's integrating people with community. So it's a very positive project, and 3 years in now, it's doing extremely well. So Andy, the next one. So this is a recently completed project in Nanaimo again, Nanaimo Association for Community Living. This nonprofit focuses on helping people with developmental disabilities. So they have programs, they have housing, and they reach way out into the community, primarily with group homes and programs around the community. This is, I think, it might be their first new build, I'm not sure, but it's one of the only ones they've done. This is interesting because there's 28 units here. Half those units are affordable market rental, and the other half are for folks with disabilities. And so it was their way of integrating these people into communities. So creating a housing project that was inclusive of everybody, people fully functioning, people that need 24/7 support are in this project. And then you take that project and you introduce it into a primarily single family neighborhood, and you furthered that integration of affordable housing, people with disabilities, people facing all kinds of issues in life. You bring them into that community, and it sits there very quietly, and it's so far, it's quite new, but so far it's been quite remarkable. We haven't been called back to the site, so that's a good sign. So my point here is just that the projects that I've been focusing on and are interested in are these projects that in the smaller communities that really reach out and become part of that community. And that's the big obstacle we have to overcome, is the acceptance of that in communities. So I'm out of time, so thank you so much.
Right. David, congratulations on taking on big subjects, but for small communities, which obviously is making a very positive statement. Thank you.
My pleasure, obviously.
So our third panelist is Roger Hughes. Roger and I have known one another for quite a long while, and so I'm happy to say that Roger's distinguished 45-year career is reflected largely through the renowned Western Canadian firm base of Hughes, Condon & Mahler, based in Victoria and Vancouver, and now I understand Edmonton. Roger's leadership and experience has driven the practice to include services to the public sector through significant and award-winning buildings. Roger's focus has been to leverage the power of design to contribute to a strong, healthy, and socially diverse society. He currently serves on the board of the Building Community Society, a non-profit organization advocating that the DTES and homeless. In 1995, Roger was made a fellow of RAIC for his contribution to design excellence, and he is recognized with the AIBC Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015. So Roger, please proceed.
Thanks, Terry. Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak directly to homelessness and the housing that municipalities and other nonprofits are providing to meet basic needs of people who can't afford even anything, any kind of accommodation that would meet standards of livability. This is one of the temporary modular housing projects in Vancouver. They're all 3 stories. They have no elevators. The project was all about speed, mandated by City Council to produce 600 units in 1 year. Very interesting project. The architect was Anthony Bonney. Interesting foundation design on these projects. It's a space frame that the modules sit on, and the space frame sits on concrete pads that can be located anywhere on the site. So it just eliminates excavation or a lot of site prep. Next slide, please, Andy. The ground floor does include support spaces. The first project did not include support spaces, and it was a real lesson for everybody that these projects for the homeless aren't just about providing suites. Housing is about more than that. And I think this was a real lesson for everybody. And they did add the commercial kitchen, common rooms, and other offices and consultation rooms. Next slide, Andy. The next 2 floors of these projects are pretty well standard plan suites, small 350 square foot studios. They're all self-contained mechanically, so they can be demounted and moved to another site. And Anthony tells me they're doing that right now, but I guess it remains to be seen just how successful that's going to be. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, David Baker Architects for the Mercy Housing Society is building 6-story affordable modular prefab housing, but it's permanent. And interesting projects. This one is across the street from the Justice Department. Could you next slide, please, Andy? Like our modular housing, it's pretty well got a straight corridor down the middle with standard plans off either side. Central corridor, no amenities at this level at all. Let's go to the next slide then. The ground floor has all of the social spaces and the outdoor space that's connected to those social spaces. It's about 17 to 18% of the whole project. There's only one small CRU on this ground floor that addresses the street. Otherwise, the rest of the project is pretty well dedicated to the housing project. These projects are fairly secure. And you'll notice both on this project and the next project, there's a secure entry that is at all times manned by somebody vetting who's coming and going. Next slide. The projects are clad on site. The modules are clad on site. In this case, they've used Corten steel. So there is a mind to creating a durable building and having it weather well. Next slide, please. And as you see, the area is in transition. It's right across the street from the Justice Institute, aka police station and law courts. And the next slide. This is the Richardson apartments by the same architect in a slightly better area. Next slide. Has a very, very strong commercial presence on the ground floor. It's been very well received by the neighborhood. Next slide. It's a courtyard typology with all of the, this being California, this works quite well. And all the yellow spaces are the common spaces and support spaces, and the pink is the commercial. Next slide. Courtyard has a common stair that connects to common areas on each residential floor. Next slide. And that the kitchen and the dining and the common areas connect to the courtyard, which actually has a visual connection through to the street. Next slide. So what you see David has been trying to do here is actually connect the residential floors to the common areas, and he's even modulating the corridor here. So he's trying to get away from that institutional feel, again, thinking that housing is more than just about the design of the suites.
I think that's about time. That was 5 minutes flies by. Do you have any last words?
No, I think
No?
my
Okay.
main thought here was just that housing really is a lot more than just about providing suites for people, and that the connections are very important to the great interaction.
Thanks, Roger, for sharing that. Interesting to see the divergent architectural aesthetics here. Finally, with Christine. Again, Christine and I have worked together in fairly recent pasts. Christine is a principal of her own architectural practice based in Vancouver Island. She is a leader in the development of ecological performance standards and has consistently advocated for the most progressive ecological design strategies in a variety of project typologies, from independent schools to infill residential projects. The focus of her practice, in collaboration with international expert Jason McLennan and his leading regenerative design practice, McLennan Design, has broadened her influence globally and evolved her ecological strategies towards deep green regenerative solutions for the built environment. So with that, Christine, I'll ask you to please proceed.
Thanks, Terry. Design at its core is about intention. It's a decision rooted in purpose. Am I designing from a place of empathy or a place of judgment? What is my underlying motivation? Am I designing a solution to a problem, or am I designing for my own comfort, to make myself feel better about the circumstance I observe? Am I designing from fear, derision, disdain, or am I designing from compassion and humility? This solution was conceived, drawn, fabricated, and installed. Effort and expense, intention. Its purpose, to discourage and prevent occupation of an otherwise protected, safe place. To deter, to dissuade, to reject. Hostile architecture, a design solution for an ill-defined problem, solving for symptoms rather than underlying conditions. What underlies the symptoms of sleeping rough, experiencing homelessness, existing in the margins? At what point does someone become other, the unseen, the inhabitor of edges, nooks, and crannies? And at what moment does intention conceive a solution to push someone even further away, out of the edges, nooks, and crannies, and where to go? An affordable, inclusive, compliant home from conception to realization is 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or more. Aspiration to reality attached to a timeline that is, frankly, untenable. The system is designed to house, to normalize, and it is formulaic in process and outcome. And it is a solution in part. There are mechanics of making housing: funders, regulators, support providers, approvers, constructors, and finally a building, all of which takes time and is designed by the system, intended to normalize what characterizes home, perhaps even homefulness. Nonetheless, these timelines and guidelines and engagements and approvals perpetuate who will experience homelessness. So in the in-between, organizations, volunteers, and community advocates deliver support and a place to go. Another piece of the broader solution. This system sees everyone, and the need is deep. Then the architecture is making something that works hard work harder. Design responds to a deep understanding of need in place. The supporters and the supported are brimming with ideas. Solutions are conceived, drawn, fabricated, and installed, and they serve need. They solve a design problem. Our cities are filled with buildings, artifacts at the end of their useful life, or so it would seem. Older buildings are part of a mature fabric, define streets, have access to mobility and services, and are frequently zoned for use compatible with dwelling. On the margins and edges, they are candidates for quiet reimagining and repurposing, simple process, rapid delivery. Another solution on the spectrum of solutions within reach, process, timeline, intention. And the work of design in this context is distilled to essentials. What does it mean to feel safe? What measures of edge, of security, of threshold are required to both welcome and keep out? Gradation to private, where there is an element of control, a lock on a door, an access that only the occupant can key, a peephole, a thermostat, a window that opens and closes and shades. Places to place stuff, to hang, to hold, everything within reach, within view, running water, power, connectivity, right-sized, both minimized and maximized, optimized. Wash hands, brush teeth, shower, behind a door that locks, hot water that never ends. Oversight and overlook, companionship, safety, connection, communication, relationship, community. For design with intention, there is reflection of and a response to the community served, both existing infrastructure adapted and additions to compose a larger whole. And that whole respects the community and the culture that it serves. Design with humility and deep learning, no preconceptions, no formula, right relationship to inspire task. Thank you.
Perfectly timed. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. So with those 4 presentations and the final comment there of design with intention, we've got about 10 minutes between the 4 panelists to just exchange a few ideas and further exchange their experiences.
If I could just pose something to the group, because I think I see a real, I appreciate these presentations and they're very thought-provoking. I see a tension, when we talk about how difficult and onerous the process is getting, so that we have so many obstacles to overcome to go from design through to construction. We have a lot of pressures on us to have more units in a project, like get as many units as possible, because there is this tremendous need. And at the same time, I think we see, like when we look at David's project in Nanaimo, that advantage of smaller scale in terms of integrating social housing into a neighborhood. And so there's that tension between trying to get as much housing to meet a need, and yet maybe the longer term solution depends on increments, smaller increments of scale. I'd be curious what you guys think about that.
Just because you referenced our project, I think, I guess I've been fortunate in some of these projects because the pressure hasn't been on these so much in terms of density. There's sort of there's a comfortable number for a smaller nonprofit to manage. So it's, the 35, 40, 50 unit kind of range. And so the density issue hasn't hit us that much. So I don't know whether I can re-answer it, but I can say for the projects we're doing in the Lower Mainland that I'm not necessarily personally involved in, but our firm is, there is that tremendous pressure. And so I see both sides of it. I see the benefits of the lower density. There's still challenges to getting there, but you're right. It's a good question. Are we trying to force too much into one box? I've been lucky with those projects in that they're not standalone. They definitely have ties to community and lower density communities. So there's a scale that's required. There's a fit that's required. So it tends to tone it down a little bit. And it does make them a little more personable. And on the other hand, the other projects are, it's land values are so high, you've got to make the most of what you can get there. But when I see some of our 100+ unit projects, 6-story, 150 unit affordable housing projects, you just wonder, what is that really creating for the future? Even Four Sisters, as old as it is, had some very handsome sort of spaces for people. We had terraces on every floor. We had all kinds of things going, and a lot of that's getting lost due to cost and these pressures that you're talking about. So it's a good question. I have no answer. I'm just rambling. Okay, I'll let somebody else ramble now.
Roger, have you got some thoughts there?
I really think it depends on the housing that you're looking at. You know, if it's market housing or even affordable housing, and people in that housing have access to the rest of the community and other facilities and amenities, then maybe, you know, getting the most density you can is not really a bad thing. But when you get into a different kind of a different cohort who are underprivileged or who have a problem, like, you know, maximum density, just units, more units is not the solution. As I was trying to say, housing isn't just about the unit count. It's about all the other things that go with it that make up a livable space, a livable existence. And I think that's the lessons that both, David Baker and San Francisco they're trying to get more integrated common spaces into their projects now, even though the formula is all about the unit count. And certainly that was a lesson Anthony Bonny learned as well, and that without the support spaces, without the other spaces, the housing really doesn't work very well. So it's a tough problem. We're doing a lot of social housing right now, and it's all about the unit count. But the people in that social housing really probably have access to other amenities that homeless people don't have access to.
Thank you,
So,
Roger. Just because we've got to move on a little bit here, but I do want to include Christine, because you had some provocative images there before we move on to the second topic. So
yeah, no, I think I would echo a lot of what's already been said. And yeah, I always ask the question, what's the driver? You know, what does the performa look like that actually yields that demand for number of doors? We've delivered housing based on capital cost metrics that yield a certain number of doors, and often the funding is tagged to how many doors can you get. And what we don't often hear about after we, achieve occupancy and walk away is what happens to, particularly with supportive housing, what happens to the money flowing for the actual supports, for the staff that are actually in relationship with the folks that are being housed and providing the kinds of support, counseling, networking, whatever's needed to sustain these communities. And what I can tell you is we've delivered, and the project I shared with you, the funding for support went away. And the funding for support going away changed fundamentally ultimately how that building works. And that's a larger story, and I'm happy to have anyone buy me a beer and have it at some time. But it's all for naught at the end of the day, because we right size and we meet the metrics of the normal parameters. And then after the dust has settled, that funding mechanic that seems to drive everything suddenly drives the feasibility of the project at its core. So I just want to highlight that.
okay, thank you. That's great, because what this does is already talk about intention and stimulate further questions. So I will now though go to the second component here, where each panelist is going to be given 5 minutes again, because we are running a little bit behind time. So the second topic, proposed project ideas and innovation regarding housing for those experiencing homelessness and or affordability. So Erica, it's your turn again.
Thank you. In terms of current and near future projects, we've seen a shift, of course, as the province has created programs to support affordable housing and the municipalities have created policy to prioritize those projects. I have a few current local projects to walk through, all of which contain below market housing in some form. The first is an infill project in the Gonzales neighborhood on a half-acre site that was a heritage designated home and property, but tragically the home was destroyed in a fire. We were tasked with designing a project that would be sympathetic to the neighborhood but would meet a minimum threshold of 18 units to afford a reasonable level of finish and site development quality, and at the same time satisfy criteria for the BC Housing Affordable Home Ownership Program. The solution we came up with was to have 16 of the units, which are all 3-bedroom homes, paired as stacked townhouses. These modules are then aggregated into 2 building clusters, each stepped in plan to soften the building's presence on the street and to bring the forms more closely into scale with the surrounding neighborhood. The materials and expression are a contemporary take on character homes in the neighborhood and are intended to recede visually behind the trees. We're still in process for rezoning and development permit for this project, and although we've been complimented on the design, the project has predictably had a polarizing response from neighbors, particularly around tree removal, parking, and traffic. Next, I have a pair of projects that incorporate affordable housing units within much larger market residential developments. Although their locations are quite different, there are a number of parallels between them. Both projects are phased into 2 buildings designed as a sort of campus in each case. The smaller buildings are conventional wood frame, while the larger buildings are high rises built with encapsulated mass timber, in the case on the left, and concrete on the right. The high-rise towers are positioned to minimize shadowing onto neighbors, while the mid-rise buildings provide a height transition to neighbors and also play a role in defining the streetscape. Premium units are weighted to the high-rise buildings, while portions of the smaller buildings are part of affordable housing programs. In the project to the right, the smaller building has 47 units and 43 of those are proposed to be below market. For both projects, height variances were requested for the high-rise portions, with the rationale being provision of generous open space for ground-oriented patios, amenity areas, and landscape buffering. Both projects really seek a sweet spot between density, livability, and neighborhood fit by integrating below-market units within carefully detailed, high-quality developments. The last project I have today is the Nigel House redevelopment, which is a building of hybrid uses that will replace the current Nigel House long-term care home located in the Nigel Valley neighborhood. And as many of you already know, Nigel Valley currently contains housing and services by 5 nonprofit societies. The redevelopment of the valley, which is under construction now, will refresh and reposition these functions within a densified and comprehensively designed neighborhood. The new development will be more connected with the surrounding context, will have a universally accessible network of public open spaces, and will mix affordable and market housing within a more integrated community. The new Nigel House will link an expanded long-term care building to assisted living and affordable rental homes. The building organizes these functions into 2 wings, with long-term care in the 4-story east wing to the right of the page here, and affordable rental and assisted living grouped together in the taller west wing. At the ground floor, each wing has a separate and distinct front door, although there's functional interconnection in the interior. Ground floor contains the larger service areas and gathering spaces for long-term care. At level 2, you start to see the wings appear. By offsetting the wings, we get daylight and views at both ends of every corridor. Then we use the overlap between the wings to tuck our service spaces. The affordable rental homes are grouped together on the 3rd floor. And then as we continue up, you start to see assisted living continuing up to the top 2 floors where it has roof deck access on top of the lower wing. So just to sum up, although the wings are functionally connected and share efficiencies of service, they're intended to read as 2 distinct forms with an emphasis on comfortable human scale. I wanted to share this with you as a sort of microcosm of integrated housing that we see as being closely aligned with the values of its larger host master plan community. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Erica. So moving on to David now to talk again about proposed projects, ideas, innovation regarding housing for those experiencing homelessness and/or affordability. David.
So this is a really fascinating project. This is obviously in Prince George. It's the Aboriginal Housing Society of Prince George. And this is quite amazing. This is a 7-acre site that this society owns outright in the city of Prince George. And their vision for this is to create a this community that has a whole variety of housing opportunities within it. And right now we're building phase one, but overall it will be townhouses, apartments, senior supportive housing, and another mixed use. There's opportunity for another mixed use project on this site, which we're not quite sure when that might happen. But the interesting thing is that we started on phase one 2 years ago, and we're already now just about to start on phase three. It's gone so rapidly. The key to it is that the site came with a 10,000 square foot building on it that the society has their offices in. It has a huge gathering space in it, and it's become the heart of this community. It's associated with a large outdoor space that will be part of it. And we're now starting to work on childcare. They're looking at a learning center. So they're building their own sort of community with all kinds of opportunities for different types of housing, progression through housing from 1-bedroom units right up to 4-bedroom units, different levels of affordability so people can transition through this community. But it's going to be quite a remarkable place, I think, when it's finished. So they have quite an outlook. Next slide, Andy. This is kind of a really, really fun one. This is in rezoning right now, another Indigenous project. These guys all have such a vision, it's amazing. But the words on this slide are interesting because when we first met with them, they were talking about, yeah, they want to build some homes, but then they started listing out all these other things that were important to them: gathering, tradition, art, health, education. And the simple move on this one that we're trying to get through BC Housing is that instead of providing the standard typical amenity space that's in the building, we've pulled that space out and pushed the building back. So the amenity space, which we now call the cultural center, has become the face of this building to the community. So again, I go back to my comments about connecting to community and showcasing them, bringing the community into this project as well. So Andy, next one. So this is, I put in this one just kind of fun and for a bit of information. This is a project that's under construction in Port Alberni. It's 47 units of family housing. The society is called the Alberni Low Energy Housing Society. So their mission is to get as close to net zero as possible. And the point of this is that what we need to think about is that there are other funding sources out there to add to projects. So the Canadian Federation of Municipalities have some funding that these people are found, and they're targeting right now, that will allow them potentially to add solar panels to this project for renewable resource. So the idea is to cover the on-surface parking with carports that are all solar panels. And right now the modeling shows that we're getting close to within 10% of net zero with this project. So the trick is that you have to get BC Housing involved in this. And so they have some concerns about additional funding and how all of that works. But my point is that there's infrastructure funding, there's this CFM funding, there are sources like that that I think we need to make our clients aware of and have them search out to see what they can add on to these projects. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Obviously, it's interesting to see that you're pursuing a variety of options and coming up with a variety of solutions. That's just interesting stuff. Roger.
I'm going to continue to talk about homelessness, and in this case, a different cohort of people, homeless youth, who are 16 to 25. This is a project in Toronto called Eva's Phoenix on Grant Street by LGA Architectural Partners. And it houses youth who must be either in school or in training. Next slide, Andy. It's a conversion of a warehouse or an industrial building that was a waterworks industrial building. That's the interior, and it's half the interior. The project actually is double the size. Next slide, Andy. This street, central community space with skylight, 3,500 square feet of skylight, and all of the residential component looks into that space, and in fact uses borrowed light from that space. The all the residential component is organized into houses, so it's 5 bedrooms in one house. The bedrooms are on the second floor overlooking the space, and the living room, kitchen, and bathroom are on the ground floor. Next slide, Andy. You can see this is a plan with the central space and the slight color differentiation between the houses. 5 rooms. You go from the upper level to an open stair that overlooks that central space down into the next level. Next slide, Andy. These open stairs connect to that open space, so there's always that connection between the space and the residential component. Next slide, Andy. And this is the ground floor with the shows the house, the main part of the house, the living room, dining room, the bathroom. The lady in charge of this project, I don't know her last name, Maria, was absolutely insisting that the project be organized into housing or houses to force these kids to learn to live together, because she felt that when they're out of here, they're going to be living in housing with other people. Next slide, please, Andy. It also has classrooms and workshops on site to train these kids, or kids that don't have access to other educational facilities. Next slide, Andy. And there's the section that shows the skylights, the board light. A lot of code alternatives to make this work in Toronto, with the interconnected space and means of escape and ventilation. All those things are quite complicated. Ian Goodman was the partner in charge. And in his words, the central space is what makes this project, which really makes the interaction work. Next slide. This is the Aboriginal Mother Center in Vancouver, project that Sune is working on. It's a multi-phase project. The first phase of it was an existing building that you see in front of the 3D model that's been dropped into this aerial photograph. Yeah, next slide, Andy. And there's a site plan. It became a multi-phase project when BC Housing bought the site next door, the existing retail site. Next slide, Andy. And now the project involves 4 phases. The first phase of the existing industrial building that'll be replaced when phase 3 is built, and the Aboriginal Mother Center moves into phase 3, and then a future phase 4 12-story tower of affordable housing is built. All of this is over commercial space surrounding a future plaza. Next slide, Andy. This is the plan of the phase 1 and phase 2. Interestingly, there's a central space, again, like Eva's Phoenix in Toronto. Next slide, Andy. And the courtyard space is the play area for the childcare that's on the middle floor of the existing building. Next slide. I think the important thing about this project is it demonstrates what we call the housing ladder, transitional housing to intergenerational housing, which is the lighter blue bar building on the front, and then to the tower on the corner, which is a combination of affordable housing and market housing. The shape of the tower, by the way, is completely governed by the sun angles for the childcare play area for December 23rd.
Thanks, Roger. And thanks for sharing your experiences through other architects' work, and then showing how that's taken and then developed into the work that your own office is doing. And it's interesting to me that so many of the panelists have talked here this is not just about housing, this is not about affordability, to a very large extent, you've all mentioned about education and certainly that sense of community.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I don't have the lovely slides that my colleagues do. And I feel like Roger set me up for success hugely. I echo your comment around sharing another architect's work and the lessons learned. And what I see in that work is this idea of innovation and how the normal paradigm of how funding works really doesn't necessarily encourage or enable innovation, which is obviously the juice that all of us appreciate very much. And so, you know, some of the ways in which innovation comes to the fore is if we're able to demonstrate to our clients and or organizations that they're not first. And I'm just screen sharing with you an organization that I think is doing some excellent work relative to assessing and understanding this issue of homelessness at a scale that's meaningful. This organization is a non-government organization, and they are working exclusively on this issue of homelessness across multiple nations, different political systems. And it's a wonderful resource for looking at different programs and different initiatives, and the post-occupancy and post-program evaluation of those programs, which I think is really important and can be a seed or a basis of, promoting innovation in the work that each of us does as we face this issue. So I'm really just providing everyone with a resource. Some of the gems in here are obviously funding is a huge issue. The physical form is often dictated by the funding mechanics and the prescriptions of guidelines. If we can change the funding model, and there's a lot of really good examples. France has a program, for instance, where the nation's citizens can invest in a savings account, and that money is made available to non-government organizations to actually provide social housing at a national level. And it's a program that's evolved over more than a century. And those kinds of things, those kinds of innovations are the basis upon which we can think differently and we can ask questions in a different way. The housing first models are other examples as well. And with that, I'll leave it to Terry to steward us through a bit of conversation.
Okay, and thank you, Christine. So, I mean, this is good. I think we've got a variety of ideas here, and so of the panelists, who would like to start in this this little bit of discussion between the four of you before we then open it up to all the people, the 40 plus who are joining us this afternoon?
Can I make a comment on just on what Christine was talking about? I'll try and make it quick. It's a long story. I'll make it quick. In 2010, 2011, I was fortunate to go to New York with some nonprofit folks and people from VIU to look at some models there. And we met with an organization, the Harlem Children's Zone, huge organization in Harlem. And I won't get into all of that, but their mandate was to look after children from prenatal to college, 10,000 kids. But the interesting thing is in 2010, they had an annual budget of $70 million. 75% of that was private funding. And they initiated that by creating a business plan, which they took around to corporations, municipalities, and they proved that there was such an economic benefit to, looking after these kids, housing, education, all those sorts of things, that it's been successful. I don't know where it is today, but it was just amazing. And we came back thinking, this funding is the issue, the government funding, which can dry up in an instant and disappear. Every year it changes, is problematic for nonprofits trying to work through this. So I don't have anything more to offer on it, but it was just fascinating to see that was driven by private funding. So I think this notion of other funding sources, however it's done, is really critical to moving forward.
Good ideas, yeah.
Just a note there, Dave. The the youth project in Toronto was all privately funded. There was no government funding in it. It gets a stipend for each person on a daily basis from the city, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
For operations.
That's wonderful. I think, you know, I hadn't thought about that much until just now, but I think that might be an interesting thing to pursue, is how would we get there, you know, on this.
Christine, that sort of comes out of your provocative ideas, thoughts, experiences. Any suggestion there that funding, finance should become creative?
Yeah, it's interesting. It really is. It's a very hot topic for me these days. I'm working with a group of philanthropists across Canada right now, and we're trying to think about how philanthropy itself is a driver of kind of the status quo, and how some of the family foundations and private funds across our nation can start to unshackle the fundees in terms of the prescriptive nature in which they provide funding. So what I mean by that is, how do we actually encourage the funders to promote innovation, to have those organizations think differently, and including failing, trying different things. The traditional model of philanthropy is you have to apply for funding and you have to demonstrate that you're going to achieve these deliverables. Well, those deliverables tend to be prescriptive. So what we receive as, if it's a physical building, what we receive is that tick box of metrics that we have to achieve in order to meet the requirements of the funder at the end of the day. So it's really, I think what I'm trying to shine a light on is, and when I was asked to participate in this, you know, for me, homelessness isn't a design problem from a physical, architectural, practical perspective. Yes, it gets there eventually, but the solution is much deeper than that. And so I'm just trying to shine a light on those things, less so provocative and more about encouraging us all to think more systemically and what actually drives ultimately when we do put pen to paper, and are the right questions being asked.
Erica, thoughts on that?
I completely agree. And, you know, I think, Terry, you had asked in one of the preparation sessions about, do architects have a role in this issue? And I think it's clear that we have a role, but we're very much in partnership with the people who are experts on services, supports that are as important to addressing the issue as the actual shelter itself. And so we're always working in partnership with those groups that are championing the project and have come up with what they think the parameters are for the project. And it's a very strange game to be trying to design a project when you're kind of playing whack-a-mole with funding programs that are maybe coming up available or maybe not. And like our programs are sometimes shifting so quickly while we're trying to shape a vision for a project that it's a completely different exercise from what we expect in a more sort of, in a way, linear, but also just a more purely architectural problem. So that's just my reaction from recent projects we've been working on, that I think we're experiencing the same kind of struggle that I'm hearing from my colleagues.
Thank you. I mean, it's really great to hear this depth of discussion, this depth of creativity, and a striving, if you will, for something better from us as architects. You know, very rarely do we get the opportunity to talk with any real passion amongst ourselves, and I think that's a shame. So I'm going to go back and say thanks to Chris particularly for bringing all this panel together. So I'm going to ask the question, I mean, this is the big question, and anybody can pick this up, but where do we go from here as architects? Where do we go from here as a profession? Can we make a difference, do you think? I certainly acknowledge the thought that we're in a partnership, but where does that partnership start and finish? That's a question.
Well, and the question of can we make a difference, you know, as an old guy that's been doing this for a long time, I like to feel that I'm making a difference. And I think just the fact that some remarkable projects are being built proves we can make a difference. I think to me, part of the solution is, as I talked about in the first panel, is sort of overcoming the obstacles along the way, which is something we just talked about, the funding sources, acceptance of projects in community, those sorts of everyday things that we face. But, you know, you pose a good question as architects, where do we take this? I mean, I remember years ago starting this, a lot of this work was done by the private sector. You know, private sector developers were doing affordable housing for societies. And it changed the financing model, it changed a whole bunch of things. So I don't know what we have to do. We have to look at alternatives, and I'm not organized enough to know how we pursue that and go about it, but I'm sure there's others, like Christine's got some great ideas about how we might do that. So I'll put you on the spot, Christine.
Yeah, I don't mind being on the spot. I put myself there, so I might as well step into it. I'll share with you a conversation I had yesterday. So I got a phone call from a not-for-profit that we do. We help out. We work on a pro bono basis on projects that wouldn't otherwise be realized without our help. And often it's, you know, a speed bump that's put up by the municipality relative to a building permit. We've all been there. We've all received the phone calls. But I've been in relationship with these folks long enough that a couple of them have come up with a problem which they wanted to talk to me about. And the issue is foster kids aging out of care, and basically being in a position where they're, you know, here's your plastic bag, we'll drop you off downtown, good luck, you know, and it's not good enough. That's a problem. That's a significant societal problem that exists, and the numbers are real, and you can research it and find out what that is. Well, it just so happens in conversation with them, I realized, well, what does it look like? What is actually needed? And what's needed and what they're seeking is to do a project that actually demonstrates a solution. And they have the support ideas of how they would support youth aging out of care and the physical kind of reality and scale at which that would occur. Well, we have a project on our boards right now that's renovating an existing building on Fort Street that's imagined to be, you know, bachelor suites for the rental market. So I got back to the office and I phoned that developer up and I basically said to him, hey, I'd like you to meet somebody. Well, less than 4 hours later, the two parties are speaking, and that project is now potentially going to be the showcase project for that particular issue. And I think it was interesting that the timing of this conversation, what I would say to that is that's about participating in community. So as professionals, it's about actually engaging in the conversations, and sometimes those are hard conversations, and connecting dots amongst those that we are in relationship with, and seeing the possibilities and thinking outside the box and challenging that developer to maybe think differently. Yeah, sure, you can get high rents for that, but wouldn't it be neat if you could actually provide housing for this particular need? And instead of putting effort into capital funding, those two folks could actually go out and focus on the supportive side and putting the mechanics in place to allow them to support those people. So that's just one example, I think, of how we can, as professionals, participate in relationship with the needs that are in our community, and connect dots. We've got to start doing that, and we've got to start asking hard questions and start challenging some of our clients. And I know everybody's doing this to maybe be more inclusive of the kinds of things that occur in their developments.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I'll make a comment. For me, standing back, this is a kind of a social, societal design kind of topic as well. past societies have often better integrated all sorts of needs for housing kind of in a more inclusive way. And that's one of the themes I've seen. I think getting a dialogue going between our profession and our practitioners and society at large on the need to integrate, kind of housing throughout our cities and throughout our societies at all scales is kind of one of the challenges here. And I don't think architects are kind of the biggest voice here, but I think we're really a needed voice. Great discussion amongst ourselves, but I think there's an outward turn that we need to contribute to as well in some way.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any other thoughts or questions from those people who have been participating in this outside of this particular discussion, but any more thoughts from the to the panelists?
I have a question, Terry, if I may.
Sure, please do.
First of all, thank you to the panelists and everybody to put this together. This is really very enlightening, very useful, and extremely helpful. Thank you. My question, and I sent it through the chat, but I'm not a tech thing, so it probably didn't go through, is to do with the boring subject of NIMBY. And one of the components of providing integrated housing that we're talking about, of the kind that we're talking about now, is the resistance you run into, which also lengthens extremely the process in time and money of delivering affordable housing. You get the usual comments about bringing down property values, all the parking and traffic's going to be on the street, undesirables wandering the neighborhood, passing out drugs to their children and so forth. What responsibility or participation, if any, do the architects have in that process? I know we all get into it, but is that something that just has to be a political will by various mayors and councils to say, we're going to rezone this for this use, or is there some other way of solving this problem? Thank you.
Does anybody want to take that on as an issue?
I'd just like to say I wish we could find a solution. I'm going through a rather nasty one of those right now. Surprising in a very small community, and I just can't believe what we've gone through. 8 public engagement meetings, and none of them have been pleasant. And I want to quote this person, but I probably should paraphrase it a little differently so I don't get into trouble. But one of the comments that came out was, well, you're going to dump all these people in my backyard. And, that's kind of the issue. So I don't know how architects talk around that, except maybe showing these examples of successful projects. Maybe they have to be made more public and their success has to be made more public. But then on the other hand, I don't know whether that's good for the residents of those projects or the nonprofits. So I'm just thinking out loud here, but maybe there's not enough public awareness, but there is definitely an issue there that has affected virtually every project that I've done. The interesting, with the exception of Prince George, the neighborhood is saying, why is this taking so long? They want it so badly. So there's something else going on there, but it's definitely an obstacle. And I've often wondered how we get around it. We have these nice public engagement meetings. We try to talk to people, the society's there. Some of the residents sometimes are there, but yeah, it carries on. It's
a tough process. It's a tough process, Tony. I know it. I've been through it a number of times, and the interesting thing is, after we built the building, I've had any number of phone calls, letters. People approached me in Safeway because of the project I did in my own neighborhood and said, gosh, that's such a nice project. We didn't think it was going to be like that. And so, but you got to tough it out. I mean, and people are just so unreasonable at that stage and so afraid. There's a very interesting comment made by one of the housing providers here in Vancouver that people have to understand homeless people aren't just the homeless people down in the downtown east side. They're your neighbors. They're from all over the city. So it's not just, you're not just transporting people from parachuting them in, completely different people necessarily into a new neighborhood. And that's a point that has to be made. And that's what happened in both the projects that I showed you, especially the ones in San Francisco. The one project on Fulton Street had a lot of resistance. And at the end of the day, everybody was so happy with it and got all kinds of great press. And it's worked very well. But somehow you have to figure out how to tough it out and maybe show other examples of how it has done well. I don't know.
Thanks, Roger. Are there any other questions for the panelists before we ask the panelists to do a 2-minute wrap up?
Terry, I would make the observation, or I guess my own personal belief, that you know, to counter the NIMBY issue that we see, if we really want to be part of this solution, it is to have an enthusiasm and excitement for the bettering of not only individuals, improving their situation, but seeing something in them and being enthusiastic and supporting them to gain a stronger foothold. And I think most of us have experiences in our families, in our neighborhoods, of struggles from time to time. For heaven's sakes, we all go through those struggles. And if in our common humanity, we can see how floating the boat for one floats the boat for us all, then I think we're a long ways there. It's when we see it as a problem and I'm not of that problem and I'm going to let somebody else deal with it. You know, that I think that's a really nice broad sentiment that I've just provided, because the individual examples of NIMBYism, they're all about individuals who are scared of change, and how do we participate in that? We want to think as architects, we have our firms, we've got a front door, and work will come to us. But I think to be a part of this topic, to believe in our improvement and lifting up of our cities and our society, it's that sensitivity that is going to work with others on an individual by individual basis. So, and to just what I've said, I'd be interested if any of the panel has a comment.
Well, okay, so I'm going to step in as the moderator here and say, first of all, thanks, Stacey, for that, because that will be the segue into this final 2 minutes per panelist to pick up and go from here. So starting with Erica, how would you like to respond to Stacey's final thoughts there?
Yeah, some thoughts that have been running through my mind through this session have been, I'm listening to Christine's call to action and thinking, I need to break out of my shell a little bit more, because I think all of the projects I was sharing really were predicated on the idea of sort of being camouflaged, that these are projects that are trying to contribute to housing affordability in a way that no one would ever notice them. And I think that is, no one would ever notice them once they're built. And I think that's partly a philosophy that, you know, a home is a home and everyone deserves the same sort of qualities of home, regardless of their circumstances. But it's also that idea of trying to just integrate with the neighborhood and not sort of draw a boundary around people of a certain economic circumstance. But I feel like this is a call to action to be a little more bold and speak out more generally on the topic, because when we get to presenting a project, we're often in a situation where we're already suspect, already suspected of being in the pocket of the developer who's paying us, who must be out to get something that is more than they deserve. And so we end up, no matter what our intentions are or how much care and attention we've put into our design, we're playing catch up to a level of fear and suspicion And it's very much focused, like we've been saying, on just that particular project, that particular moment in time. And there's so little context around that. You just hear people say, well, this project's not going to solve homelessness. You say, well, no, but every project is an opportunity to try to advance the solution towards it. So I'm just trying in my mind right now to think about how, rather than, we'll keep doing what we're doing of advocating for our projects and advocating for projects that we think are good for the community, not just good for the people that are paying for them. But at the same time, I think there's a role to try to educate on a broader scale about this issue in Victoria.
Good comments. And I hear that word educate again. So, David, do you like to wrap up the final 2 minutes here?
Well, that's Erica's got a lot of good things to say there. It's hard to follow up, but I'll give you just what came to mind is an example of our project in Nanaimo with Nutsamatlalam. They liked that site. It's on a really busy road. You wouldn't highlight it as the greatest location for family housing, but they wanted to make a statement. They wanted to say, we're here. They were not embarrassed to say, this is us, this is who we are, this is our culture, we're here, we're part of this community. And just thinking about it now, maybe that's something I should be thinking more about with the projects, and when we go to the public, is not to be sort of trying to be, I was going to say polite, but secondary to the neighbors' concerns, and have better demonstrations of what has been successful and what has happened, because that project has been pretty well accepted and it's right out there. It's very different than anything around it, but there's been no negative feedback from it. And yeah, maybe I have to think more about being a little braver about going out there and telling people that, no, we're going to do this and it's great and you're going to love it. So I don't know. I think though that perhaps we should take a hint from that and be a little bit more outward about the projects that are successful, and thinking about how we might do that. And maybe if I go back to communities, I need to not show the project we're trying to get there, but show the projects that have been done, and show them how successful they are, and lead them to talk to other nonprofits and trying to get the message out of how these things work and how it's such a benefit to their own community. There's nothing really negative about it. So it's all good stuff. Is making me think some more.
That's great. Good. Super. Thanks. Roger, 2 minutes to wrap up.
2 minutes.
Yeah. Final thoughts.
One of your previous panelists, Karen Stinson, said, I don't think we're going to build our way out of this problem. I have to agree with her, because I think, and I'm talking about homelessness, real homelessness here. We're treating the symptom all the time. And, while I don't believe that we're ever going to end homelessness by a shift in the paradigm caused by architectural design, that doesn't mean we still shouldn't keep on pushing the envelope, because I think we're trapped into that. We're still going to be at the front line trying to build what we can to solve homelessness. But really, the cause of homelessness, I think we've got to drill down deeper and look at education, look at parenting, look at poverty, look at all the causes that we think are the root causes of homelessness, and what can we do back there. And I think, in fact, we can have an impact. It's not something that's going to move the dial in a really obvious way, but we do design childcare facilities, we do design schools, we do design community centers, we design housing. All of that work, I think, is what we do. We just have to do the best we can do. And I think we just have to keep asking the question, how can we push the envelope? How can we make this better? Keeping in mind that if we do that, perhaps we go a little way to solving the problems that create the traumas that create homelessness. Done.
Thank you. Christine, you have the opportunity to close out these remarks and summarize.
Yeah, not sure I can do it justice. First of all, just so much gratitude for being in conversation with my colleagues today. And I will, full disclosure, say I came to this conversation very reluctantly. But I think what comes up for me first and foremost is that there's no single solution, that there is a spectrum of solutions that we all need to be exploring. And I think that's a message I want to make sure everybody heard, that there is no one stop. And we are handcuffed in many ways by the guidelines and governance and the restrictions that we have to play into in order to secure funding or receive approvals or whatever it is. And so, that ability to muster a bit of courage and to perhaps challenge the norms, I think is a really important part of our work as professionals. And I think we become drafting services unless we kind of put on those really difficult clothes sometimes and speak across difference and challenge the status quo and challenge the norms. Yeah, and I will just say this, the context in which we're operating has never been more complex and more desperate for systemic change. And we're watching the world facing realities that are unprecedented in human existence. And a lot of the systems that have created the circumstances of inequity that affect our neighbors and citizens are crumbling. And so what are we going to put into that void? What are we going to introduce into those artifacts that actually moves us forward as citizens and as communities? So I'm an optimist, and I think we just need to show up, and it's hard work, and we need to pull the oars and support each other. Yeah. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
That's great. When you finished on the word optimist there, I'm always remember of other quotes from, what's his name, Foster, who said, in order to be a successful architect, you must be an optimist. So with that, Andy, I think we've reached, we've gone beyond 1:30 now. And so I think it's up to me now again to say thank you very much to the panelists. You've shown an amount of creativity and vision and a backdrop here that we can all participate in. And again, I'll thank Chris, Andy, and Stace for putting this panel discussion together, because I know it takes a lot of work. But so it's a huge, huge topic that we've tried to address. And I just think by the time I finished School of Architecture some 55 years ago, one of the comments was, just remember, guys, architects paint the backdrop to society. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. Thanks very much.